As of January 1st, 1991, the Soviet Union stood as the world's largest nation, encompassing approximately 22 million square kilometers, accounting for nearly 1/6 of Earth's land surface. Its population exceeded 290 million, hosting a diverse array of 100 distinct nationalities within its borders. Boasting a formidable arsenal of tens of thousands of nuclear weapons, the Soviet Union wielded influence through mechanisms like the Warsaw Pact, extending its sphere of control throughout Eastern Europe. Astonishingly, within a year, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Pinpointing a singular cause for the dissolution of this global superpower is practically impossible. The collapse of the Soviets was a complex and far-reaching event influenced by a myriad of internal and external factors. Upon assuming the role of General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union on March 11, 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev aimed to revitalize the stagnant Soviet economy and streamline the unwieldy government bureaucracy. Faced with initial reform attempts that yielded little, he introduced the policies of Glasnost, openness, and Perestroika, restructuring. While Glasnost aimed to encourage dialogue, it inadvertently opened the gates to criticism of the entire Soviet apparatus. The state lost control of both the media and the public sphere, leading to the rise of democratic reform movements throughout the Soviet bloc. Perestroika showcased the shortcomings of both capitalist and communist systems, lifting price controls in some markets, but leaving bureaucratic structures intact. This allowed communist officials to resist policies that did not personally benefit them. Ultimately, Gorbachev's reforms and his departure from the Brezhnev Doctrine hastened the demise of the Soviet Empire. By the close of 1989, Hungary had dismantled its border fence with Austria. Solidarity had gained power in Poland. The Baltic states were moving toward independence, and the Berlin Wall had fallen. The Iron Curtain had descended, signaling the end of the Soviet Union was imminent. By certain metrics, the Soviet economy held the rank of the world's second largest in 1990. Despite this standing, shortages of consumer goods became routine, and hoarding was widespread. The Soviet black market economy was estimated to be more than 10% of the country's official GDP. Prolonged economic stagnation had plagued the nation for years, and the Perestroika reforms served only to worsen the situation. Wage hikes were sustained by printing money, contributing to an inflationary spiral. Fiscal policy mismanagement rendered the country susceptible to external factors, and a drastic decline in oil prices thrust the Soviet economy into a downward spiral. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the Soviet Union stood as one of the world's leading producers of energy resources, such as oil and natural gas. The export of these commodities played a pivotal role in supporting the world's largest command economy. However, when oil prices plummeted from $120 a barrel in 1980 to $24 a barrel in March 1986, this crucial lifeline to external capital dried up. Although the price of oil briefly surged after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in August 1990, by that juncture, the collapse of the Soviet Union was already well underway. There exists a widely accepted belief that Soviet defense spending experienced a significant surge in response to Ronald Reagan's presidency and initiatives like the Strategic Defense Initiative. Contrary to this perception, the Soviet military budget had been on an upward trajectory since at least the early 1970s. Nevertheless, Western analysts were left making educated guesses regarding precise figures. Estimates of Soviet military spending varied between 10 and 20% of GDP, and even within the Soviet Union, obtaining an exact account proved challenging due to the involvement of various government ministries with competing interests. What can be stated definitively is that military spending showed little regard for overall economic trends. Even during periods of economic decline, the military remained well-funded. Moreover, research and development talent predominantly prioritized the military, redirecting potential innovators and entrepreneurs who could have contributed to Gorbachev's efforts to transition partially to a market economy into defense industries. Beyond financial considerations, the Soviet engagement in Afghanistan, 1979 to 89, emerged as a pivotal military factor in the dissolution of the Soviets. The Soviet Army, hailed for its World War II accomplishments and instrumental in quelling the Hungarian Revolution and Prague Spring, became entangled in the challenging terrain of the graveyard of empires. Over 1 million Soviet troops participated in the decade-long occupation, resulting in around 15,000 casualties and numerous wounded. The conflict also inflicted a devastating toll on the Afghan population, with over 1 million civilians killed and at least 4 million externally displaced. The once formidable army that triumphed over Hitler and suppressed dissent during the Cold War now faced frustration from mujahideen armed with American surface-to-air missiles. While government control of the press kept dissent about the Afghan war subdued, the era of Glasnost opened avenues for widespread war weariness to be voiced. The military, a potent adversary to Gorbachev's reform initiatives, found itself hampered by the Afghan quagmire, losing leverage in hindering the progress of Perestroika. Within the Soviet republics, the Afghansi, veterans of the Afghan conflict, agitated against what they perceived as Moscow's war. Soldiers from Central Asian republics, feeling stronger ethnic and religious ties to Afghans than Russians, led widespread protests. In European republics, the rift with Moscow intensified. Anti-war demonstrations erupted in Ukraine, and opposition forces in the Baltic republics interpreted the Afghan war through the lens of Russian occupation in their own countries. This fueled secessionist movements that culminated, largely unhindered, in the declarations of independence by all 3 Baltic states in 1990. Glasnost indeed brought forth a wave of new concepts, ideas, and experiences. Soviet citizens, enthusiastic to explore these changes, engaged in activities ranging from devouring essays on democratization by leading political philosophers to dipping a toe into a market economy through Western-style fast food. In 1984, Eduard Shevardnadze had conveyed to Gorbachev, "Everything is rotten. It has to be changed." This sentiment was shared by many. The Soviet public was disenchanted with the pervasive corruption ingrained in the Soviet state. Gorbachev's objective with Glasnost and Perestroika went beyond mere economic reforms. It aimed for a profound transformation of the Soviet spirit and the establishment of a new compact between the Soviet regime and its people. Gorbachev's chief advisor, Alexander Yakovlev, articulated the challenge before them. The main issue today is not only economy. This is only the material side of the process. The heart of the matter is in the political system and its relation to man. Ultimately, the tension between the newly empowered citizenry and a Soviet state with shattered credibility proved insurmountable. A last-ditch coup attempt by communist hardliners delivered the final blow, fracturing the Soviet Union. Throughout the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States stood on the brink of mutual nuclear destruction. What few had anticipated, however, was that the Soviet Union would be brought to its knees by an incident involving a civilian nuclear plant. Gorbachev, having been in power for just over a year, witnessed the Unit 4 reactor at the Chernobyl power station in Pripyat, now in Ukraine, explode on April 26, 1986. The explosion and ensuing fires unleashed over 400 times the radioactive fallout of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The official response to this catastrophe became a litmus test for Gorbachev's doctrine of openness, and in this respect, Glasnost fell woefully short. Communist Party officials swiftly moved to suppress information regarding the disaster, even ordering May Day parades and celebrations in the affected area to proceed as planned, despite the acknowledged risk of radiation exposure. Reports from the West detailing dangerously high levels of wind-transported radioactivity were dismissed as gossip, while party officials quietly collected Geiger counters from science classrooms. Although workers managed to bring the radiation leak under control by May 4th, Gorbachev did not issue an official public statement until May 14th, 18 days after the disaster. He characterized the Chernobyl incident as a misfortune and criticized Western media coverage as a highly immoral campaign of malicious lies. Over time, Communist Party propaganda increasingly contradicted the daily experiences of those in the contamination zone, dealing with the physical effects of radiation poisoning. Whatever trust remained in the Soviet system had been shattered. Decades later, Gorbachev, marking the anniversary of the disaster, acknowledged that even more than my launch of Perestroika, Chernobyl was perhaps the real cause of the collapse of the Soviet Union 5 years later. The collapse of the Soviet Union was a culmination of internal contradictions and external pressures, economic inefficiencies, a draining arms race, political mismanagement, and a yearning for autonomy among the diverse Soviet population all played pivotal roles. The Gorbachev era, rather than saving the Soviet Union, inadvertently hastened its demise. The shockwaves of this collapse reshaped the global geopolitical landscape, marking the end of a bipolar world and the onset of a new era. The demise of the Soviet Union serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of empires, the complexities of governance, and the inexorable march of history.